Hello and welcome to the course on Introduction on Psychology of Language. I am Dr. Ark Verma from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. We are talking about various aspects of what language is in this week. The title of the week is Introduction to Language, wherein we are talking about various aspects of knowing what it is to use language, what are the various aspects of language. In this lecture, I am going to talk to you about some of the basic concepts in psycholinguistics, some of the basic concepts in understanding what language study is about, how does a psychologist study language. So, let us move to this very interesting quote. This quote is from this novel Pygmalion, written by Bernard Shaw, and one of the main characters says something like this. She says, "I don't want to talk grammar, I want to talk like a lady in a flower shop." What is the language of the lady in a flower shop, if I may ask? How does a lady in a flower shop speak? Now, I will just give you a brief background to where this is situated. This is basically situated in that time in England where speaking perfectly grammatical, perfectly rule based language was considered a mark of pedigree, was considered a mark of sophistication. And if you could not produce language with that degree of rule bound perfectness, then your language was considered to be less rich, then you were considered to be coming from a slightly poorer social class, and that is how people would look at you. It was that important to speak language correctly in that time. Is it very different now? Is it very different in the way we treat, say for example, English now? I think there is a lot of emphasis on speaking grammatically perfect, grammatically correct language here and now as well. So, let us ask, how important is grammar for a person to say for example acquire and use language? We have been talking about grammar in the last lecture as well. So, let us just revisit that for a bit. We know that grammar consists of the rules of a language. Grammar consists of rules that we use to combine words into sentences, and sentences in say for example longer sentences, paragraphs, text, that is typically forms the entire language. Grammar is also something that lets us understand when others are speaking to us. Suppose, say for example, there is this sentence, it says the cat chased the mouse. Now, unless we know the rules of how this sentence is constructed, we will not be able to understand it. Let me give you an example. Suppose, say for example, the sentence was to be the cat chased the mouse, but somebody is saying the sentence in a way that goes like cat the mouse chased. Now, the meaning kind of gets lost if the rule is not there. Also, unless you know the rule, you will not be able to understand what has been said. It is very interesting because it is something that we take for granted for the most part. It is grammar that is helping us make sense of those words appearing in that particular order, in that particular way, to convey that message that the cat was, the cat is chasing the mouse. So, it is a matter of controversy. I mean, people have talked about it differently, linguists and other people who have opined on language, psychologists, psycholinguists, they have talked about this at some detail, and it is almost a matter of controversy that whether the rules of grammar are psychologically real or they just serve as descriptive properties of the language. So, the proposal is grammar something that is actually necessary for us to understand the message? I was telling you, say for example, what a perfectly grammatical sentence looks like, the cat chased the mouse, and what an ungrammatical sentence look like, the cat mouse chased. Okay, this is an example of grammar violation. However, if you are actually looking at the cat chasing the mouse and I tell you the cat mouse chased, you can actually look at that event and completely understand what I am trying to say, even if I am not really speaking in a perfectly grammatical manner. So, the question is whether grammar is something that is psychologically necessary for the listener to understand the language or for the speaker to produce the language in a particular way. That is a very important question. The other way or the other idea is that maybe grammar just describes the language to us. Maybe grammar just looks at tens of thousands of sentences and just describes the way those sentences are structured. So, are we deriving, is it descriptive grammar or is it prescriptive grammar, to kind of touch on the thing that we talked about in the last lecture. So, this is something that people have been trying to understand. Okay, let us look at some of the aspects of grammar. One of the very important aspects of grammar is word order. In what order should words appear, or say for example in what particular order specific words should appear in order to convey the desired message. Say for example, let us take this, I see what I eat is or is not the same as if I say I eat what I see. Obviously the two meanings from these sentences are very different. What is changed here? It is the same amount of words, only the order of the words has changed, and the order of the words in that sense is having a profound influence on the meaning of the sentence. It might have a profound influence on how I am saying this, and it also has a profound influence on how you are hearing it. So word order is something which is a very important aspect of any language, and that is specified by the grammar of the language. This, say for example, there are different languages in the world, and the word order kind of manifests in very different ways across these different languages. There are some languages that have this particular word order which is referred to as subject, verb, object. Say for example English, the cat chased the mouse, the boy chased the girl chased the boy. So you see, the girl chased the boy, so there is a noun, there is a verb, and there is another noun, and the idea of the sentence is subject. The subject comes first. Who are you talking about? So you are talking about the girl chased the boy. So I am talking about the subject, and the verb is chased, and the object, who is being chased? The boy is being chased. So the object is coming at the last. So the girl chased the boy, the cat chased the mouse, the boy chased the girl, and this is typically how sentences in English are framed. You first have the subject, you then have the verb, and then you have the object. There are other word orders also possible. Suppose for example, particular languages have this concept of subject, object, and then verb. Suppose in Hindi you have this particular word order which says subject, object, verb. An example of this could be Ram ne Sita ko kitab di. So Ram, किसके बारे में बात करें? Who are we talking about? We are talking about Ram, who is the subject, and we are talking about Sita ko, who is the object, and we are talking about what has happened to Sita, is been given the book. So kitab di. So you have subject, you have object, you have verb. Hindi for that matter permits other kinds of word orders as well, and that is something that brings us to this concept of that, you know, different languages are very particular or are very specific about word order in different degrees. Each language has its own canonical or typical word order, but say for example there are languages like Russian that, say for example, do not care about word order at all. If say for example salute is a verb, salute probably means married. I am not very sure of that, we can check that at some point. But suppose say for example somebody has to say Victor salute Lenu, or Victor married to Lenu, or something like that, or kicked Lenu, or whatever. Victor salute Lenu, Victor Lenu salute, salute Victor Lenu, Lenu salute Victor. All of them are giving the same message and are perfectly grammatically acceptable in Russian. So you have this language which is perfectly flexible about word order. So word order is a very interesting property of language which is obviously specified by grammar, but you have to understand that different languages have their different aspects of word order. Okay, some languages have one particular word order, some languages have a different particular word order, and some languages do not really care about word order anyways. These languages which basically say for example do not really care about word order or are fairly flexible about word order might be making use of suffixes or prefixes in order to convey very specific meanings. Say for example in English we have trip, tripped, tripping, which is basically just the addition of these suffixes which tell us about some of the which basically act as tense markers on this verb trip. In Turkish for example, hel means come and helmedim means I could not come. So you just add some thing at the end of the word hel and it is already being used to communicate a slightly different meaning. So these properties are manifested in different ways across these different languages. Another very basic property of language that we can talk about is, which is not really specified in syntax by the way, is the phonology of the language. So we've finished the discussion on syntax, we're talking about a different basic property of language. We're talking about phonology. Now phonology basically is the makeup of how the sounds in a particular language are structured. There are two ways in which you can look at sounds. You can say, for example, look at the acoustics of the particular language, which is you can just take this signal, you can record what I am saying, put this into a particular program, in a computer program, and that can analyze the frequency of my speech. So for example, you are basically talking about the physical characteristics of the sound. So you can say, for example, come up with a spectrogram and see, say for example, in the beginning there is high frequency sounds emitted and then low frequency sounds emitted and other high frequency sounds emitted. So that is the physical characteristics. That is not something we are particularly interested in for this course at least. The other way to look at the way sounds are structured is the phonetics of the language. What is the phonetics? Phonetics is again the physical properties of the speech sounds, voicing or manner of articulation, place of articulation, those very specific. How are these sounds being produced? Okay, if you know about how are these particular speech sounds being produced and what are the properties of these particular speech sounds, then you're probably talking a little bit more about phonetics of the language. Phonology is typically the sound categories that each language uses to divide up the space of the possible sounds. As I told you in the last lecture, English has 40 phonemes. However, it does not really mean that there are only 40 sounds in English. Entire sound space in English has been carved out into 40 different basic sounds which will be combined to form words. So there are 40 phonemes, 40 basic sounds in English that are combined in various ways to come up with words. Suppose, say for example, as I was telling you, you have to be able to distinguish between pat and bat. You have to also similarly be able to distinguish between pin and spin. Now the only difference between these two sounds, pin and spin, is basically that spin is unaspirated. You cannot hear your breath when you are speaking spin. But you can say, for example, hear your breath if you are speaking pin. Okay, so you can kind of, it's a very easy test of checking whether something is aspirated or unaspirated. Now phoneme is the basic unit of sound in this particular language. So what are the basic units of sound in a particular language? These are referred to as phonemes. Changing phonemes, how do you know, say for example, something is a phoneme of the language? You can do it in different ways. Say for example, in Thai, pa, which is unaspirated, refers to forest, and pa, which is aspirated, refers to the act of to split. Okay, so as soon as you change this property, the meaning changes, and hence these two sounds are distinguishable from each other on a very basic level, and these are recognized as two different phonemes. So that is one way that you can understand how phonemes are different from each other. The other way also is, say for example, allophones, different forms of the same phoneme. So pin and spin are typically just the same phoneme. The only difference is whether they are aspirated versus unaspirated. They are the form of the same phoneme. Then you have this concept of minimal pairs. If you have two words and you can, say for example, change just one sound and the meaning can be changed, then these are referred to as minimal pairs. So for example, cat, bat, pat, mat, you are just changing one sound. So this is referred to as the minimal pair of words. Similarly, dog, log, cog, hog, etc. is also another example of minimal pairs. Sound is produced by moving the parts of the vocal tracts, the lips, the teeth, the tongue, the mouth, the voice box, that is larynx. And sound is also understood in a way by, you say for example, different kinds of sounds are categorized on the basis of where they are coming from. Say for example, the larynx modifies the flow. So voice box here, it modifies the flow of air from the lungs, and it produces a range of different higher frequencies or different sounds. So depending on how these sounds are coming across, say for example, you have this family of sounds called vowels. Vowels basically are sounds which are made with a relatively free flow of air. You can do it and you can check it. Say for example, these are when you are making these sounds, the vocal tract is more or less open. So whenever you are saying a, e, I, you are basically keeping the vocal tract relatively open. Then you have consonants. Consonants are typically found by constricting or closing the part of the vocal tract. Suppose, say for example, when you are doing P, you are obstructing the flow of the air. You are saying B or T or D, you are obstructing the flow of air through the vocal tract, and what you are creating eventually is a family of sounds referred to as consonants. There are also, say for example, this combination of vowels that are present. So for example, these are those vowels that are basically looked at as a combination of two basic vowel sounds. Say for example, boy. So O and I, you're kind of combining those sounds. Cow, you're combining two basic vowel sounds. Okay, so then you have vowels, you have consonants, and you have diphthongs, or vowels and diphthongs, and then you have consonants. So that is again a very important aspect that you should remember. Another important aspect of is when you look at sound is where is it being articulated from. Linguists are mostly interested in these kind of things, and I am just kind of bringing that so as to give you a very basic primer into things that we will be talking about later. So this is very important. Place of articulation is very important. Part of the vocal tract that is closed or constricted during articulation is referred to as the place of articulation for that sound. Suppose, say for example, some sounds are referred to as dentals. They are found by putting the tongue tip behind the upper front teeth. So for example, theta. How are you saying theta? If you sound theta, you will see that theta is coming from by your putting the tongue on the back of the upper teeth. So you are using your teeth to produce this sound, hence the name is called dentals. Then you have things like labiodentals. Labiodentals is, say for example, you are using the lower lip and touching it to the upper teeth. Say for example, V. How do you produce V? If you do it in slow motion and if you are conscious of what you are doing, you might be able to figure this out very quickly. Another important aspect in this is, say for example, manner of articulation. How do you modify the flow of air through the vocal tract? We talked about placing, we talked about place of articulation, we also talked about manner of articulation. You can say for example, completely restrict the flow of air, and in that sense you will be creating a family of sounds referred to as stops. Say for example, you are completely restricting the flow of air, p, b, etc., t. Okay, and you can have things like fricatives when you are constricting the airstream by making a hissing sound. So f, v, s. Okay, so these sounds are can be classified in this manner as well. Now another way, again we are still talking about the sound structure of the language. We can, another way to say for example organize the sound space is probably by this point of syllables. Now particularly different languages have syllabic structures, and they are kind of talked about as syllable based languages, and some other languages are different, they are alphabet based language. We will come to that when you are talking about reading. But what are syllables? Syllable is typically, these are rhythmic units that form words. So this is almost like referred as the smallest note in a word. When I am talking about, say for example, matter, two syllables, cat, just one small note. So cat has one syllable, matter has two syllables, syllable has three syllables. So it's very easy if you have to, say for example, if somebody tosses words at you and you have to divide those words into particular syllables, the best way is to try and sing them, and the smallest note will be your syllable. So matter, syllable, cat, all of these kind of gives you a good idea about how to chunk these words into syllables. What is the basic makeup of syllable? A syllable is basically looked at as a combination of an onset and a rhyme. The onset is typically the initial consonant cluster. Say for example, cat, k sound in cat is the onset of the syllable cat. Then you have something in the middle, so that is your or say for example, after the initial sound is your rhyme. So rhyme has a middle part and an end part. So at is the rhyme of this syllable which is referred to as, which is cat. In that, in at you have a nucleus sound which is basically the central vowel. So in cat there is the a, that is the nucleus, and then there is the sound of t which is the coda. So if you really look at how a syllable is constructed, you can say it is onset plus nucleus plus coda, and then you can do some basic maths. It is, say for example, it is onset plus rhyme, rhyme is nucleus plus coda, so a syllable is onset plus nucleus plus coda. Very easy to look at it in this way. Cat, k is the onset, a is the nucleus, t is the coda. This is typically how you understand how syllables are made. Okay, let us move to something slightly different. We were talking about sounds, so till now let us talk about how words are constructed. What is the anatomy of words? What does the anatomy of words look like? So if you have to understand the anatomy of words, you have to understand how words are created. What are the rules we are following in order to create words? Something that a science, say for example, the field that looks at how words are created is referred to as morphology. Morphology is typically the system of rules that governs how words will be formed. So, for example, the system of rules that governs formation of words is referred to as morphology. I am giving you very informal, very non-specific kind of definitions, but this is probably something that will help in picking up the basic concepts in a much clearer manner. Obviously, you can refer to the reference book. I am following Matthew Traxler's Introduction to Psycholinguistics as the main book. You can go back, read the book, and there are so many other materials available, but what I am trying to give you here is a very basic understanding of these concepts. So, what is morphology? A system of rules that governs how words are formed. Let us come back. Let us take an example. A very interesting way to look at how morphemes figure is this. Let us take this word called player. Now, you have this word called player. If you divide this, you have play and you have er. Okay. Play is something that can stand on itself, has its own meaning, and hence it is referred to as a free morpheme or a lexical morpheme. It is something that can stand alone and has a specific meaning of its own. What about the er? Er is something that is fulfilling a grammatical function here. It is added as a suffix at the end of this free morpheme play in order to convey a particular meaning or fulfill a particular grammatical function. Hence, is referred to as a bound morpheme because it cannot stand alone, it does not really have a meaning of its own, or as a grammatical morpheme because basically it is there to fulfill a grammatical function. Okay. So, do you get it? You have free morphemes or lexical morphemes which can stand alone, have their own meaning, and you have bound / grammatical morphemes which do not have a meaning of their own, which cannot stand alone, but they are used at the end of words or sometimes in the beginning of words in order to say for example sometimes impart more meaning of the word, impart a different sort of a meaning from the word, or fulfill particular grammatical purposes. So, this is about morphology. Now, we started with sounds, we went to words. Where do we go next? Let us go to sentences. One of the rules that governs, say for example, combination of sentences is referred to as phrase structure rules. What are phrase structure rules? If you look at a particular sentence, you can divide the sentence into smaller constituents referred to as phrases. Okay. A phrase, say for example, how do you understand a phrase? A phrase can be understood as a combination of a critical word, one main important word, and some other words together expressing one single idea. I will give you an example. Let us say I say the young swimmer accepted the silver medal. Now, you have two phrases here. You have the young swimmer, I am talking about one single idea, and accepted the silver medal is another idea. So, the young swimmer is one phrase, accepted the silver medal is another phrase. Okay. Or you can say for example divide it slightly differently. Say for example, you can say the young swimmer and then you can have accepted and then you can have silver medal. You can look at this in terms of three different ideas. So, you can kind of divide the phrases. So, in this particular manner. One thing is, say for example, all of these divisions, how are you chunking this particular thing? There is not really a very strict guideline of doing this. If you do it in one way, you get a particular meaning. If you do it in another way, you get another particular meaning, or say for example, that is something that you have to always remember. Now, there are particular rules by which these phrases are constructed and combined. Okay. So, syntactic rules that specify the permissible sequences of these constituents in the language are, let us say, referred to as phrase structure rules. The central idea here is that these sentences have to be built up in a hierarchical fashion, one structure then other structure then the other structure. That is typically how the larger body of language will be constructed. These rules are referred to as rewrite rules. Let us take an example. Suppose you have a sentence. The sentence will be composed of a noun phrase and a verb phrase. So, the young swimmer accepted the silver medal. So, you have the noun phrase and you have the verb phrase. What is the noun phrase typically consisting of? So, noun phrase is consisting of a determiner and the noun, the young swimmer. So, the is the determiner, young swimmer is your noun. A noun phrase, you can further divide this, the young swimmer, also into two nouns. So, there can be two noun phrases if you look at it. Another way is, let us come to the verb phrase, accepted the silver medal. You can have verb plus noun phrase. So accepted the silver medal, again you have a noun phrase here and you have a verb here. You can just go till the verb and have this entire verb phrase. So you can have accepted as just one verb phrase, and then if you have understood these rules, you can kind of have any noun or any verb figuring in, and using that you can create any number of language, any number of sentences. Suppose there could be many nouns. I was saying the young swimmer accepted the silver medal. You can say Vlad accepted the silver medal. You can say Boris accepted the silver, anything. Or say for example, you can use any verb. You accepted, instead of accepted, you can use, say for example, made the silver medal, loves the silver medal, likes the silver medal, whatever. Determiners obviously can be a, and, the, and those articles that you know of. Okay, so this is in that sense slightly interesting demonstration of why there is this concept of discrete infinity in our language. These are these rewrite rules and these phrase structure rules that kind of permit us to create infinite amount of language in a very systematic and a very intelligible, comprehensible manner. So this is how, say for example, a lot of language is created. Now obviously you might be wondering that how easy it is, or whether or not this system runs into any errors at any point in time. Obviously when there are rules and you have to use them, there will be obviously some kind of confusion sometimes, some kind of misapplication of rules sometimes. So there is this concept of phrase structure ambiguity, wherein, say for example, these phrase structure rules may lead to a degree of confusion, may lead to a degree of ambiguity, which makes it difficult for the listener to understand, or the reader to understand what is written, or the listener to understand what is said. So let us take this example. Let us have a sentence. The sentence again is, they are eating apples. Okay, so you have the sentence, you have noun phrase they, and then you have verb phrase are eating apples, and you can structure it in this sense: noun phrase they are eating apples. This is one. You can, however, divide this in a different sense as well. Say for example, you can have they are eating apples. Say for example, you can divide this to give a completely different meaning. We can also, say for example, look at this and how it will create a different meaning completely. Let us say they are eating apples. These are apples that we eat. Or say for example, they are eating apples. So we are talking about they who are eating apples. If you divide the construction of the word in different ways, you can look at the how this is done in your slide. You can based on how you chunk the material, how do you chunk the sentence into phrases, is creating sort of a different meaning. Okay, and that can obviously, say for example, sometimes happen with the listener or with the reader, if appropriate. With the reader it's sometimes easy because the punctuation marks can be used, but with the listener it is almost many a times that they will, say for example, run into these kind of confusions. Another basic property of language is this property of linguistic productivity. It is again very similar to that of recursion or generativity. We are just again discussing it, how does this really come about. So linguistic productivity is our ability to create and comprehend novel utterances. We are talking about phrase structure rules, we are talking about these things. These things allow us to create new language, they allow us to create novel utterances, or understand something that we haven't heard ever before. So given this infinite amount of possible utterances, we probably must be storing these infinite amount of rules. We might be kind of storing, okay, if this comes across, this is the way I understand this. So let us say for example, your understanding of the verb phrase is verb plus subject. So the child thinks, which is the verb phrase, the man left. So that is another sentence, and then you can divide that sentence into the man and the left is the verb phrase. Okay, so one has to kind of wonder as what is it that allows us to create so many of these novel utterances, and what is it that helps us to understand things that we haven't ever heard or we haven't ever come across. So that is typically the property of linguistic productivity. Now linguistic productivity comes about only because of this particular rule, which is referred to as the recursive rule, because you can embed things into each other, and because, say for example, you can create that kind of an embedding, that is how you can create this infinite amount of sentences. This is something that is a resilient property of human language. It is used by children. It's used even by. It's not something that is, say for example, something that you master. Once you've mastered language for 5 years, only then you can use recursion. You can always use it. Even children use it. Say for example, 2 to 3-year-old children a lot of times create something that you have not heard. You have not taught that to the child, but the child is coming up with these sentences all by themselves. So that is obviously possible. We all the time we create new words, we create new structures, and that again is a testimony or an evidence of how linguistic productivity works. We have talked about some of these properties of language. Let us say, for example, let us spend some time talking about syntax. Now, when talking of the role of syntax in human language processing, one of the names that comes to the mind is that of Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is a linguist, is a thinker, is a political thinker, and somebody who kind of came to the scene in around 1950s, 60s, and had a very profound impact on how people understand language, on most of the theories about language at the moment. Or suppose, say for example, if you have a friend who's studying linguistics, you talk to them, they will tell you that Chomsky is probably one of the most important linguists of this century. Two things Chomsky talked about. One was the relationship between language and brain. He particularly believed that, say for example, there is something called the language acquisition device, some unique capability of our brain that allowed us to acquire language, that allowed us to learn language. That is one. And the second is, Chomsky has done a lot of work on the technical description of language, how our language is structured, what is unique about the structures of language, what is unique about the structures of different languages in comparison with each other. So obviously you are doing this course on psycholinguistics or the psychology of language, but suppose you have some interest in understanding linguistics per se, Chomsky is one of the people you should certainly read about. We will talk a little bit about some of the stuff that Chomsky said and is also very important to us, in a sense that we will be using these concepts again and again during this course. So one of the things Chomsky said is language is innate, it is biologically programmed, and it is unique to the human species. It is not something that any other species on the face of the earth could have acquired. Okay, so that is something interesting. The other thing that Chomsky also says is language is independent of other cognitive functions. Chomsky treats language almost as a independent cognitive function that does not rely on the other cognitive abilities. Suppose, say for example, attention, perception, learning, memory, etc., in order to exist, or it does not really interact with them a lot. This concept has also been in some sense addressed by people like Jerry Fodor, and if you want to talk more about this or read a little bit more about this, you can refer to some of the other lectures that I have given in a course called Basic Cognitive Process, which is also running in this semester. Now another thing that Chomsky did was he distinguished between two things. He distinguished between competence and he distinguished between performance. What is competence? Competence is your knowledge of the language. Most of the time when we are creating new sentences, when you are creating new paragraphs, you are giving speeches, etc., we have this sense of whatever we are saying is grammatically correct. We are not really before every sentence wondering whether this is what I am going to say is grammatically correct or not, whether the next sentence is correct or not. We have this intuition about grammatically acceptable samples, both when we are listening to them and we are producing them. So that is your knowledge of how language is, that is your competence about the language. The other important aspect is your performance. So our actual production of language. You might know everything about language, but because you are excited, because your attention is not there, you are thinking about something, you might create errors. You might perform language in a way that might be erroneous for a bit, and you can realize that and correct that. So Chomsky distinguishes between these two things. He said there is this sense of competence and there is this sense of performance, and these two might not be always equal. These two might not always be one and the same thing. There might be a difference between whatever we know about language and whatever we do with this language. So that is interesting. It's being used in understanding a lot of performances of language, a lot of theories of how children acquire language. These concepts are very interesting to understand, and we will talk about these concepts in more detail when we move ahead. Chomsky also talks about, in some sense, externalized and internalized language, which is very similar to competence and performance. So externalized language is the language we use. Samples and properties of real utterances may be analyzed, may be looked for particular patterns, and it is the job of linguistics that should be concerned with the regularities of real language via grammar. Say for example, one of the things that linguists usually do is they look at large samples of language and they look for particular patterns in them, and they come up with particular rules describing these patterns. So that is your E language or externalized language. And then there is this concept of I language, that is again very similar to competence, the knowledge of language, that what those things that you know about language. I language, however, is different in the sense that this is typically talking about the mental phenomena that precede the performance and they follow the performance. Say for example, how did you come up with this sentence, and once the sentence is said, how did the other person understand this sentence, or say for example, how did you understand that sentence. So I language is the mental phenomena that precede and follow the performance. Okay. Another thing that Chomsky talks about is the surface structure and deep structure. So he says surface structure refers to the superficial arrangement of constituents and reflects the order in which these words are pronounced. So I will take some examples in a bit. And the deep structure is the underlying structure or the gist of that sentence. Let us take an example. Let us say the sentence is, flying planes can be dangerous. Now flying planes can be dangerous is one sentence, and there are ways in which you can look at it and it may be very ambiguous. Are planes that fly dangerous, or is the action of flying planes dangerous? Flying planes can be dangerous can be understood in at least these two ways. So there is a deep structure ambiguity here. The word is perfectly alright, the sentence is perfectly alright, it is perfectly grammatically acceptable, but there is an ambiguity at the level of deep structure here. Okay, so let's take another example. John is easy to please versus John is eager to please. Here you see the ambiguity is mostly in terms of the surface, the word is already changed, the surface structure is very different. Or say for example, you can have something different. Let's say Arlene played the tuba was played by Arlene. The deep structure here, the message here is the same, but the surface structure is different. Okay. In the first sentence, flying planes can be dangerous, the surface structure is same, the deep structure can be different and can be ambiguous. In the last example, Arlene played the tuba, or say for example, if you are saying the tuba was played by Arlene, the surface structure is different because the exact words that are used are different, but the deep structure is pretty much the same message is getting across. So this is some of the properties of language, some of the very basic concepts of language, and I have mentioned Chomsky again and again, that we will come across, that we will encounter in some of the other chapters. So this lecture is typically about priming you with some of these basic concepts. You can come back and listen to them again, and you can go back to the book and refer to it, and try and get a basic understanding of what these things are. I will obviously explain them again when they come up in the next lectures. Now one of the things we can talk about is the relationship between language and grammar. This is something that we started today's lecture with. So what is language? Is infinite set of well-formed sentences. What is grammar? It is a formal device which has these particular rules, and using these rules you can generate all of the language that is possible. There are various theories of language, and these various theories of language are composed of very different specific or general hypotheses about the structure of language. This is how the structure of language should be, and this is how structure of language should be. There are these various things. Now how do you know that whether a particular grammar is useful or it is not useful? So Chomsky says there are three ways in which you can evaluate that. You can check whether the grammar is observationally adequate, meaning a grammar must be able to generate all the possible structures. So if you are specifying a particular grammar for a particular language, it should be able to generate all the sentences that are possible within that language. There should not be one sentence or two sentences that are left out unexplained by this particular specification of rules, that is grammar. If a grammar does that, it is said to be observationally adequate grammar. The other thing is descriptive adequacy. Suppose, say for example, there are these different utterances, sentences, words, phrases, clauses in this thing. They might be similar, they might not be similar. A particular grammar should be able to describe the relationship between utterances that are similar, or the differences between utterances that are not similar. Syntactic differences. This is a subject, object, verb. This is subject, verb, object. These kind of things. So the grammar should be able to tell by its rules whether these two structures are similar. If similar, in what manner. If dissimilar, again in what manner. So if grammar is being able to do that, it is supposed to be descriptionally adequate. Then finally, this important aspect of explanatory adequacy. This concept of explanatory adequacy is typically what involves the ability to explain the role of linguistic universals in language acquisition. Linguistic universals typically are those concepts that Chomsky has very well specified, which are common across all known languages. Any language that we know of that is documented should have at least this concept of, say for example, recursion, generativity, or say for example semanticity, or for example arbitrariness. So a language, say for example, or the grammar, the features of grammar or the rules basically that are across all languages. So there should be a subject and there should be an object and there should be a verb. These are things which are, say for example, universally present across all languages. So this is explanatory adequacy. So the grammar should have some sort of a sense about what are the universals in this language and how children are using these universals to acquire language. Now if you kind of look at these things, you will be able to appreciate whether the grammar is doing its part or not. Is it useful grammar or not. Now even though this system is there and people have talked about this in to different degrees, we have this problem that, say for example, most grammars that we have specified still cannot fully account for all the linguistic utterances. It cannot really explain all that is said in the language by follows these particular rules. Also, a lot of these grammars do not take into account cognitive processing consideration. They do not really take into account how is the person understanding the sentence. Suppose I give you a very long sentence. Ram said that Sita thinks that, say for example, John did something. So if I give you a very long sentence, how is it that you are processing this sentence? Because we have limited memory. We can retain limited amount of information. So these things also are not very well understood or explained in so many of these grammars. Also, when you talk about smaller components, morphemes and phrases, etc., a lot of these grammars lack details in expressing all of this. So that is also some of this problem with these grammars. So let us look at two kinds of grammars that have been proposed, and we'll say for example at some point see if they are following these aspects of adequacy or not. So Chomsky specified this grammar referred to as the transformational grammar, and he basically said that the phrase structure rules that we were talking about earlier, they do not completely capture linguistic competence. They do not completely capture what is known to language by the language's users. So they say these set of these relationships between these constituents that is known to people can be captured by a set of rewrite rules, and he called these rewrite rules as transformational rules. So what is a transformational rule? A grammatical rule that can convert one syntactic structure into another. We've been doing these exercises when we were in school. Say for example, passivization. So the vampire chases the ghost is chased by the vampire. You have to have this transformational rule. You apply this transformational rule and you convert one sort of syntactic structure into another sort. The meaning you see is still the same here. There are other kinds of things, say for example the particle movement transformation. John phoned up the woman, John phoned the woman up. So the particle is shifted from the middle towards the end. So some of these rules are there. Another interesting grammar that has been proposed by Bresnan is this concept of, and there are so many of these grammars also available, which are referred to as lexical functional grammars or psychologically realistic grammars. Now psychologically realistic grammars typically are proposed to address the concerns of the user. how is the speaker speaking this language or the listener understanding this language, whether the rules that we are specifying in our grammar are psychologically realistic or not. Do they make any sense in a psychological explanation of how people use language or not. So these lexical functional grammars, typically they take into account these individual lexical terms, that is word. They are very concerned about how these words are being used, how is the user understanding these words. Say for example, it talks about these lexical entries, which by the way exist in many forms. Say for example, the word kiss, kissed, kissing, etc. These are all this is just one lexical entry which can exist in these many forms. And then you can talk about the kind of compatible sentences which can be created using these different lexical entries. So you can have Mary kissed John, John was kissed by Mary, Mary was kissing John, something that kind of accommodates all of these different lexical entries. So the focus here is on words and how these rules are kind of changed to accommodate these words. Okay. This is just an example. I am not really going into the details of the grammars or their adequacies, because that is not really what we are here to do. We will talk mostly about the psychological aspects of how people understand language. However, one of the things that we can note before closing this discussion on grammars is that these psychologically real or the lexical functional grammars, they simplify the explanatory burden and they put it towards the lexicon. These are the kinds of words, and these are the kind of rules that are made to understand or use those words. They seem like a more economical and a plausible way of explaining effortless comprehension of sentences. How do we understand sentences just like that? How do we understand most language without too much effort? Probably because we are kind of understanding the words very effortlessly. We are kind of getting the words very quickly. So that is another advantage of having these psychologically real or psychologically realistic grammars. Also, the psychologically realistic grammar kind of they take into account the consideration that working through these syntactic rules might be slightly more difficult than just picking up these words from the mental lexicon. What does this word, if kissed is there, kissed means that kiss has happened in the past. If kissing is there, kissing is happening in the present, and that might be much easier to recall from the mental lexicon, which is a dictionary for words in our head, as compared to going through that entire phrase structure, going through how the sentence was constructed in order to understand that aspect of language. We will talk about these things when we are talking about this chapter on sentence comprehension in later lectures. So let's talk a little bit about what others have to say about grammar. So one of the very important people, language scientists, is Ray Jackendorf, and Ray Jackendorf kind of comes as a very interesting opponent, or say for example very interesting alternate position to that of Chomsky's. So Jackendorf says that syntax is not the core of our linguistic language. He rejects that view. He says linguistic productivity is not just due to syntactic rules, it's probably due to our creativity and how do we come up with these different words. He suggests that grammars have multiple formation rules which operate in parallel to facilitate simplified language processing. So it cannot be that there is a particular grammar that says rule 1, rule 2, rule 3 till rule 10, and these are the rules in this fixed order, in this non-flexible arrangement that will be applied. He says there can be multiple number of formational rules which people are using flexibly all the time in order to communicate with each other, in order to effortlessly produce and understand language at the same time. So one of the things that he also says is that grammars must be studying these interfaces. Say for example, it's only a parent, not a teacher. It's only a parent, not real. So just by the way I am producing this, I can create different meanings. I am not really going into the structure of the sentence or anything. So this is also a very interesting position to take on how important syntax is to language or grammar is to language. The idea of today's lecture was typically to just give you a very brief, a very superficial account of what are the basic concepts in understanding language processing. So I hope you've kind of got it. Some of the take home messages for today is that you should have this concept of how these linguistic rules are applied to get a deep understanding of language, and this deep understanding of properties of language may then help you in studying language processing at large. I mean, all of the things that we talked about today are probably going to be very useful when we talk about sentence processing, sentence production and comprehension in one of the later lectures. Also, we have to understand that these linguistic rules or syntax are not paramount. They do not really completely specify how language is to be produced. So that is something that I leave you with. The material is obviously borrowed from Traxler's book on Introduction to Psycholinguistics. Thank you.